Welcome back to O'Clock in the Journal, where timeless stories come alive. Today, we continue our journey into the world of Maurice Leblanc with The Hollow Needle, a thrilling tale of hidden treasures, cunning deceptions, and the unmatched intellect of Arsène Lupin. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Shot. Raymond listened. The noise was repeated twice over, clearly enough to be distinguished from the medley of vague sounds that formed the great silence of the night, and yet too faintly to enable her to tell whether it was near or far, within the walls of the big country house, or outside, among the murky recesses of the park. She rose softly. Her window was half open. She flung it back wide. The moonlight lay over a peaceful landscape of lawns and thickets, against which the straggling ruins of the old abbey stood out in tragic outlines: truncated columns, mutilated arches, fragments of porches, and shreds of flying buttresses. A light breeze hovered over the face of things, gliding noiselessly through the bare, motionless branches of the trees, but shaking the tiny budding leaves of the shrubs. And, suddenly, she heard the same sound again. It was on the left, and on the floor below her, in the living rooms, therefore, that occupied the left wing of the house. Brave and plucky though she was, the girl felt afraid. She slipped on her dressing gown and took the matches. "Raymond! Raymond!" A voice as low as a breath was calling to her from the next room, the door of which had not been closed. She was feeling her way there, when Suzanne, her cousin, came out of the room and fell into her arms. "Raymond, is that you? Did you hear?" "Yes. So you're not asleep?" "I suppose the dog woke me some time ago. But he's not barking now. What time is it?" "About 4. Listen, surely someone's walking in the drawing room." "There's no danger. Your father is down there, Suzanne." "But there is danger for him. His room is next to the boudoir. M. Duval is there too, at the other end of the house. He could never hear." They hesitated, not knowing what course to decide upon. Should they call out? Cry for help? They dared not. They were frightened of the sound of their own voices. But Suzanne, who had gone to the window, suppressed a scream. "Look! A man! Near the fountain!" A man was walking away at a rapid pace. He carried under his arm a fairly large load, the nature of which they were unable to distinguish. It knocked against his leg and impeded his progress. They saw him pass near the old chapel, and turn toward a little door in the wall. The door must have been open, for the man disappeared suddenly from view, and they failed to hear the usual grating of the hinges. "He came from the drawing room," whispered Suzanne. "No, the stairs in the hall would have brought him out more to the left, unless—" The same idea struck them both. They leant out. Below them, a ladder stood against the front of the house, resting on the first floor. A glimmer lit up the stone balcony. And another man, who was also carrying something, bestrode the baluster, slid down the ladder, and ran away by the same road as the first. Suzanne, scared to the verge of swooning, fell on her knees, stammering, "Let us call out. Let us call for help." "Who would come?" "Your father, and if there are more of them left, and they throw themselves upon him, then, we might call the servants. Your bell rings on their floor." Yes, perhaps. That's better. If only they come in time." Raymond felt for the electric push near her bed and pressed it with her finger. They heard the bell ring upstairs, and had an impression that its shrill sound must also reach anyone below. They waited. The silence became terrifying, and the very breeze no longer shook the leaves of the shrubs. "I'm frightened," said Suzanne. And, suddenly, from the profound darkness below them, came the sound of a struggle, a crash of furniture overturned, words, exclamations, and then, horrible and ominous, a hoarse groan, the gurgle of a man who is being murdered. Raymond leapt toward the door. Suzanne clung desperately to her arm. No, don't leave me. I'm frightened." Raymond pushed her aside and darted down the corridor, followed by Suzanne, who staggered from wall to wall, screaming as she went. Raymond reached the staircase, flew down the stairs, flung herself upon the door of the big drawing room, and stopped short, rooted to the threshold, while Suzanne sank in a heap by her side. Facing them, at 3 steps' distance, stood a man, with a lantern in his hand. He turned it upon the 2 girls, blinding them with the light, stared long at their pale faces, and then, without hurrying, with the calmest movements in the world, took his cap, picked up a scrap of paper and 2 bits of straw, removed some footmarks from the carpet, went to the balcony, turned to the girls, made them a deep bow, and disappeared. Suzanne was the first to run to the little boudoir which separated the big drawing room from her father's bedroom. But, at the entrance, a hideous sight appalled her. By the slanting rays of the moon, she saw 2 apparently lifeless bodies lying close to each other on the floor. She leaned over one of them. "Father! Father, is it you? What has happened to you?" she cried distractedly. After a moment, the Comte de Gesvres moved. In a broken voice, he said, "Don't be afraid. I am not wounded." "Duval? Is he alive? The knife? The knife?" 2 men servants now arrived with candles. Raymond flung herself down before the other body and recognized Jean Duval, the Count's private secretary. A little stream of blood trickled from his neck. His face already wore the pallor of death. Then she rose, returned to the drawing room, took a gun that hung in a trophy of arms on the wall, and went out on the balcony. Not more than 50 or 60 seconds had elapsed since the man had set his foot on the top rung of the ladder. He could not, therefore, be very far away, the more so as he had taken the precaution to remove the ladder in order to prevent the inmates of the house from using it. And soon she saw him skirting the remains of the old cloister. She put the gun to her shoulder, calmly took aim, and fired. The man fell. "That's done it, that's done it," said one of the servants. "We've got this one. I'll run down." "No, Victor, he's getting up. You had better go down by the staircase and make straight for the little door in the wall. That's the only way he can escape." Victor hurried off, but before he reached the park, the man fell down again. Raymond called the other servant. "Albert, do you see him down there? Near the main cloister?" "Yes, he's crawling in the grass. He's done for. Watch him from here. There's no way of escape for him. On the right of the ruins is the open lawn. And Victor, do you guard the door on the left," she said, taking up her gun. "But surely you are not going down, miss?" "Yes, yes," she said, with a resolute accent and abrupt movements. "Let me be, I have a cartridge left. If he stirs—" She went out. A moment later, Albert saw her going toward the ruins. He called to her from the window. "He's dragged himself behind the cloister. I can't see him. Be careful, miss." Raymond went round the old cloisters to cut off the man's retreat, and Albert soon lost sight of her. After a few minutes, as he did not see her return, he became uneasy, and, keeping his eye on the ruins, instead of going down by the stairs, he made an effort to reach the ladder. When he had succeeded, he scrambled down and ran straight to the cloisters near which he had seen the man last. 30 paces farther he found Raymond, who was searching with Victor. "Well?" he asked. "There's no laying one's hands on him," replied Victor. "The little door? I've been there. Here's the key. Still, he must. Oh, we've got him safe enough, the scoundrel. He'll be ours in 10 minutes. The farmer and his son, awakened by the shot, now came from the farm buildings, which were at some distance on the right, but within the circuit of the walls. They had met no one. "Of course not," said Albert. "The ruffian can't have left the ruins. We'll dig him out of some hole or other." They organized a methodical search, beating every bush, pulling aside the heavy masses of ivy rolled round the shafts of the columns. They made sure that the chapel was properly locked and that none of the panes were broken. They went round the cloisters and examined every nook and corner. The search was fruitless. There was but one discovery. At the place where the man had fallen under Raymond's gun, they picked up a chauffeur's cap in very soft buff leather. Besides that, nothing. The gendarmerie of Uville-la-Rivière were informed at 6 o'clock in the morning and at once proceeded to the spot, after sending an express to the authorities at Dieppe with a note describing the circumstances of the crime, the imminent capture of the chief criminal, and the discovery of his headgear and of the dagger with which the crime had been committed. At 10 o'clock, 2 hired conveyances came down the gentle slope that led to the house. One of them, an old-fashioned calash, contained the deputy public prosecutor and the examining magistrate, accompanied by his clerk. In the other, a humble fly, were seated 2 reporters, representing the Journal de Rouen and a great Paris paper. The old chateau came into view, once the abbey residence of the priors of Ambermazy, mutilated under the Revolution, both restored by the Comte de Gèvres, who had now owned it for some 20 years. It consists of a main building, surmounted by a pinnacled clock tower, and 2 wings, each of which is surrounded by a flight of steps with a stone balustrade. Looking across the walls of the park and beyond the upland supported by the high Norman cliffs, you catch a glimpse of the blue line of the Channel between the villages of Sainte Marguerite and Varangeville. Here the Comte de Gèvres lived with his daughter Suzanne, a delicate, fair-haired, pretty creature, and his niece Raymond de Saint-Véran, whom he had taken to live with him 2 years before, when the simultaneous death of her father and mother left Raymond an orphan. Life at the chateau was peaceful and regular. A few neighbors paid an occasional visit. In the summer, the Count took the 2 girls almost every day to Dieppe. He was a tall man, with a handsome, serious face and hair that was turning gray. He was very rich, managed his fortune himself, and looked after his extensive estates with the assistance of his secretary, Jean Duval. Immediately upon his arrival, the examining magistrate took down the first observations of Sergeant Cavillon of the gendarmes. The capture of the criminal, imminent though it might be, had not yet been effected, but every outlet of the park was held. Escape was impossible. The little company next crossed the chapter hall and the refectory, both of which are on the ground floor, and went up to the first story. They at once remarked the perfect order that prevailed in the drawing-room. Not a piece of furniture, not an ornament, but appeared to occupy its usual place. Nor was there any gap among the ornaments or furniture. On the right and left walls hung magnificent Flemish tapestries with figures. On the panels of the wall facing the windows were 4 fine canvases, in contemporary frames representing mythological scenes. These were the famous pictures by Rubens which had been left to the Comte de Gèvres, together with the Flemish tapestries, by his maternal uncle, the Marquès de Bobadilla, a Spanish grandee. Monsieur Filot remarked, if the motive of the crime was theft, this drawing-room, at any rate, was not the object of it. You can't tell, said the deputy, who spoke little, but who, when he did, invariably opposed the magistrate's views. Why, my dear sir, the first thought of a burglar would be to carry off those pictures and tapestries, which are universally renowned. Perhaps there was no time. We shall see. At that moment, the Comte de Gèvres entered, accompanied by the doctor. The Count, who did not seem to feel the effects of the attack to which he had been subjected, welcomed the 2 officials. Then he opened the door of the boudoir. This room, which no one had been allowed to enter since the discovery of the crime, differed from the drawing-room inasmuch as it presented a scene of the greatest disorder. 2 chairs were overturned, one of the tables smashed to pieces, and several objects, a traveling clock, a portfolio, a box of stationery, lay on the floor. And there was blood on some of the scattered pieces of notepaper. The doctor turned back the sheet that covered the corpse. Jean Duval, dressed in his usual velvet suit, with a pair of nailed boots on his feet, lay stretched on his back, with one arm folded beneath him. His collar and tie had been removed, and his shirt opened, revealing a large wound in the chest. Death must have been instantaneous, declared the doctor. 1 blow of the knife was enough. It was, no doubt, the knife which I saw on the drawing-room mantelpiece, next to a leather cap? Said the examining magistrate. Yes, said the Comte de Gèvres. The knife was picked up here. It comes from the same trophy in the drawing-room from which my niece, Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, snatched the gun. As for the chauffeur's cap, that evidently belongs to the murderer. M. Filleul examined certain further details in the room, put a few questions to the doctor, and then asked Monsieur de Gesvres to tell him what he had seen and heard. The Count worded his story as follows. Jean Duval woke me up. I had been sleeping badly, for that matter, with gleams of consciousness in which I seemed to hear noises, when suddenly opening my eyes, I saw Duval standing at the foot of my bed with his candle in his hand and fully dressed, as he is now, for he often worked late into the night. He seemed greatly excited and said in a low voice, "There's someone in the drawing room." I heard a noise myself. I got up and softly pushed the door leading to this boudoir. At the same moment the door over there, which opens into the big drawing room, was thrown back and a man appeared who leaped at me and stunned me with a blow on the temple. I am telling you this without any details, Monsieur le Juge d'instruction, for the simple reason that I remember only the principal facts, and that these facts followed upon one another with extraordinary swiftness. And after that, I don't know. I fainted. When I came to, Duval lay stretched by my side, mortally wounded. At first sight, do you suspect no one? No one. You have no enemy? I know of none. Nor Monsieur Duval either? Duval! An enemy? He was the best creature that ever lived. M. Duval was my secretary for 20 years, and, I may say, my confidant, and I have never seen him surrounded with anything but love and friendship. Still, there has been a burglary and there has been a murder. There must be a motive for all that. The motive? Why, it was robbery, pure and simple. Robbery? Have you been robbed of something, then? No, nothing. In that case, if they have stolen nothing, and if nothing is missing, they at least took something away. What? I don't know. But my daughter and my niece will tell you, with absolute certainty, that they saw two men in succession cross the park, and that those two men were carrying fairly heavy loads. The young ladies may have been dreaming, you think? I should be tempted to believe it, for I have been exhausting myself in inquiries and suppositions ever since this morning. However, it is easy enough to question them. The two cousins were sent for to the big drawing-room. Suzanne, still quite pale and trembling, could hardly speak. Raymond, who was more energetic, more of a man, better looking too, with the golden glint in her brown eyes, described the events of the night and the part which she had played in them. So I may take it, mademoiselle, that your evidence is positive. Absolutely. The men who went across the park were carrying things away with them. And the third man? He went from here empty-handed. Could you describe him to us? He kept on dazzling us with the light of his lantern. All that I could say is that he is tall and heavily built. Is that how he appeared to you, mademoiselle? Asked the magistrate, turning to Suzanne de Gesvres. Yes, or rather no, said Suzanne, reflecting. I thought he was about the middle height and slender. Monsieur Filleul smiled. He was accustomed to differences of opinion and sight in witnesses to one and the same fact. So we have to do, on the one hand, with a man, the one in the drawing-room, who is at the same time tall and short, stout and thin, and on the other, with two men, those in the park, who are accused of removing from that drawing-room objects, which are still here. M. Filleul was a magistrate of the ironic school, as he himself would say. He was also a very ambitious magistrate, and one who did not object to an audience, nor to an occasion to display his tactful resource in public, as was shown by the increasing number of persons who now crowded into the room. The journalists had been joined by the farmer and his son, the gardener and his wife, the indoor servants of the chateau, and the two cabmen who had driven the flies from Dieppe. Monsieur Filleul continued, There is also the question of agreeing upon the way in which the third person disappeared. Was this the gun you fired, mademoiselle, and from this window? Yes. The man reached the tombstone, which is almost buried under the brambles, to the left of the cloisters. But he got up again? Only half. Victor ran down at once to guard the little door, and I followed him, leaving the second footman, Albert, to keep watch here. Albert now gave his evidence, and the magistrate concluded, So, According to you, the wounded man was not able to escape on the left because your fellow servant was watching the door, nor on the right because you would have seen him cross the lawn. Logically, therefore, he is at the present moment in the comparatively restricted space that lies before our eyes. I am sure of it. And you, mademoiselle? Yes. And I, too, said Victor. The deputy prosecutor exclaimed with a leer. The field of inquiry is quite narrow. We have only to continue the search commenced 4 hours ago. We may be more fortunate. Monsieur Filleul took the leather cap from the mantel, examined it, and, beckoning to the sergeant of gendarmes, whispered, Sergeant, send one of your men to Dieppe at once. Tell him to go to Maigret, the hatter, in the Rue de la Barre, and ask Monsieur Maigret to tell him, if possible, to whom this cap was sold. The field of inquiry, in the deputy's phrase, was limited to the space contained between the house, the lawn on the right, and the angle formed by the left wall and the wall opposite the house, that is to say, a quadrilateral of about 100 yards each way, in which the ruins of Ambrumésy, the famous medieval monastery, stood out at intervals. They at once noticed the traces left by the fugitive in the trampled grass. In 2 places, marks of blackened blood, now almost dried up, were observed. After the turn at the end of the cloisters, there was nothing more to be seen, as the nature of the ground, here covered with pine needles, did not lend itself to the imprint of a body. But, in that case, how had the wounded man succeeded in escaping the eyes of Raymond, Victor, and Albert? There was nothing but a few breaks, which the servants and the gendarmes had beaten over and over again, and a number of tombstones, under which they had explored. The examining magistrate made the gardener, who had the key, open the chapel, a real gem of carving, a shrine in stone which had been respected by time and the revolutionaries, and which, with the delicate sculpture work of its porch and its miniature population of statuettes, was always looked upon as a marvelous specimen of the Norman Gothic style. The chapel, which was very simple in the interior, with no other ornament than its marble altar, offered no hiding place. Besides, the fugitive would have had to obtain admission. And by what means? The inspection brought them to the little door in the wall that served as an entrance for the visitors to the ruins. It opened on a sunk road, running between the park wall and a copsewood containing some abandoned quarries. M. Filleul stooped forward. The dust of the road bore marks of anti-skid pneumatic tires. Raymond and Victor remembered that, after the shot, they had seemed to hear the throb of a motor car. The magistrate suggested, "The man must have joined his confederates." "Impossible!" cried Victor. "I was here while Mademoiselle and Albert still had him in view." "Nonsense! He must be somewhere, outside or inside. We have no choice." "He is here," the servants insisted obstinately. The magistrate shrugged his shoulders and went back to the house in a more or less sullen mood. There was no doubt that it was an unpromising case. A theft in which nothing had been stolen, an invisible prisoner. What could be less satisfactory? It was late. Monsieur de Gesvres asked the officials and the 2 journalists to stay to lunch. They ate in silence, and then Monsieur Filleul returned to the drawing-room, where he questioned the servants. But the sound of a horse's hoofs came from the courtyard, and, a moment after, the gendarme who had been sent to Dieppe entered. "Well, did you see the hatter?" exclaimed the magistrate, eager at last to obtain some positive information. "I saw Monsieur Maigret. The cap was sold to a cab driver." "A cab driver?" "Yes, a driver who stopped his fly before the shop and asked to be supplied with a yellow leather chauffeur's cap for one of his customers. This was the only one left. He paid for it, without troubling about the size, and drove off. He was in a great hurry." "What sort of fly was it?" "A calash." "And on what day did this happen?" "On what day?" "Why, today, at 8 o'clock this morning." "This morning? What are you talking about?" "The cap was bought this morning, but that's impossible, because it was found last night in the park. If it was found there, it must have been there, and consequently it must have been bought before." "The hatter told me it was bought this morning." There was a moment of general bewilderment. The nonplussed magistrate strove to understand. Suddenly he started, as though struck with a gleam of light. "Fetch the cabman who brought us here this morning! The man who drove the calash! Fetch him at once!" The sergeant of gendarmes and his subordinate ran off to the stables. In a few minutes, the sergeant returned alone. "Where's the cabman?" "He asked for food in the kitchen, ate his lunch, and then—" "And then?" "He went off." "With his fly?" "No. Pretending that he wanted to go and see a relation at Ouville, he borrowed the groom's bicycle. Here are his hat and greatcoat." "But did he leave bare-headed?" "No. He took a cap from his pocket and put it on." "A cap?" "Yes. A yellow leather cap, it seems." "A yellow leather cap? Why, no, we've got it here." "That's true, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, but his is just like it." The deputy sniggered. "Very funny, most amusing. There are two caps. One, the real one, which constituted our only piece of evidence, has gone off on the head of the sham flyman. The other, the false one, is in your hands." "Oh, the fellow has had us nicely." "Catch him, fetch him back," cried Monsieur Fiole. "Two of your men on horseback, Sergeant Quevillon, and at full speed." "He is far away by this time," said the deputy. "He can be as far as he pleases, but still we must lay hold of him." "I hope so, but I think, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that your efforts should be concentrated here above all. Would you mind reading this scrap of paper, which I have just found in the pocket of the coat?" "Which coat?" "The driver's." And the deputy prosecutor handed Monsieur Fiole a piece of paper, folded in four, containing these few words written in pencil in a more or less common hand: "Woe betide the young lady if she has killed the governor." The incident caused a certain stir. "A word to the wise," muttered the deputy. "We are now forewarned." "Monsieur le Comte," said the examining magistrate, "I beg you not to be alarmed, nor you either, mademoiselle. This threat is of no importance, as the police are on the spot. We shall take every precaution, and I will answer for your safety. As for you, gentlemen, I rely on your discretion. You have been present at this inquiry, thanks to my excessive kindness toward the press, and it would be making me an ill return." He interrupted himself, as though an idea had struck him, looked at the two young men, one after the other, and, going up to the first, asked, "What paper do you represent, sir?" "The Journal de Rouen." "Have you your credentials?" "Here." The card was in order. There was no more to be said. Monsieur Fiole turned to the other reporter. "And you, sir?" "I?" "Yes, you. What paper do you belong to?" "Why, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, I write for a number of papers, all over the place. Your credentials?" "I haven't any." "Oh, how is that?" "For a newspaper to give you a card, you have to be on its regular staff." Well, I'm only an occasional contributor, a freelance. I send articles to this newspaper and that. They are published or declined according to circumstances." "In that case, what is your name? Where are your papers?" "My name would tell you nothing. As for papers, I have none." "You have no paper of any kind to prove your profession?" "I have no profession." "But look here, sir," cried the magistrate with a certain asperity, "you can't expect to preserve your incognito after introducing yourself here by a trick and surprising the secrets of the police. I beg to remark, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that you asked me nothing when I came in, and that therefore I had nothing to say. Besides, it never struck me that your inquiry was secret, when everybody was admitted, including even one of the criminals." He spoke softly, in a tone of infinite politeness. He was quite a young man, very tall, very slender, and dressed without the least attempt at fashion, in a jacket and trousers both too small for him. He had a pink face like a girl's, a broad forehead topped with close-cropped hair, and a scrubby and ill-trimmed fair beard. His bright eyes gleamed with intelligence. He seemed not in the least embarrassed and wore a pleasant smile, free from any shade of banter. M. Fiol looked at him with an aggressive air of distrust. The two gendarmes came forward. The young man exclaimed gaily, "Monsieur le juge d'instruction, you clearly suspect me of being an accomplice. But, if that were so, would I not have slipped away at the right moment, following the example of my fellow criminal? You might have hoped. Any hope would have been absurd. A moment's reflection, Monsieur le juge d'instruction, will make you agree with me that, logically speaking." Monsieur Fiol looked him straight in the eyes and said sharply, "No more jokes. Your name?" "Isidore Beautrelet." "Your occupation?" "Sixth form pupil at the Lycée Janson de Sailly." Monsieur Fiol opened a pair of startled eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Sixth form pupil at the Lycée Janson, Rue de la Pompe number." "Oh, look here," exclaimed Monsieur Fiol. "You're trying to take me in. This won't do, you know. A joke can go too far. I must say, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that your astonishment surprises me. What is there to prevent my being a sixth form pupil at the Lycée Janson? My beard, perhaps? Set your mind at ease. My beard is false." Isidore Beautrelet pulled off the few curls that adorned his chin, and his beardless face appeared still younger and pinker, a genuine schoolboy's face. And, with a laugh like a child's, revealing his white teeth, "Are you convinced now?" he asked. "Do you want more proofs? Here, you can read the address on these letters from my father. To Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet, indoor pupil, Lycée Janson de Sailly." Convinced or not, Monsieur Filol did not look as if he liked the story. He asked, gruffly, "What are you doing here?" "Why, I'm improving my mind. There are schools for that. Yours, for instance." "You forget, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that this is the 23rd of April, and that we are in the middle of the Easter holidays." Well, I have every right to spend my holidays as I please. My father lives at the other end of the country, in Savoy, and he himself advised me to take a little trip on the north coast." "With a false beard?" "Oh, no, that's my own idea. At school, we talk a great deal about mysterious adventures. We read detective stories in which people disguise themselves. We imagine any amount of terrible and intricate cases. So I thought I would amuse myself, and I put on this false beard. Besides, I enjoyed the advantage of being taken seriously, and I pretended to be a Paris reporter. That is how, last night, after an uneventful period of more than a week, I had the pleasure of making the acquaintance of my Rouen colleague, and this morning, when he heard of the Ambrumésy murder, he very kindly suggested that I should come with him, and that we should share the cost of a fly." Isidore Beautrelet said all this with a frank and artless simplicity, of which it was impossible not to feel the charm. Monsieur Fiol himself, though maintaining a distrustful reserve, took a certain pleasure in listening to him. He asked him, in a less peevish tone, "And are you satisfied with your expedition?" "Delighted." "All the more as I had never been present at a case of the sort. And I find that this one is not lacking in interest, nor in that mysterious intricacy which you prize so highly, and which is so stimulating, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. I know nothing more exciting than to see all the facts coming up out of the shadow, clustering together, so to speak, and gradually forming the probable truth." "The probable truth. You go pretty fast, young man. Do you suggest that you have your little solution of the riddle ready?" "Oh, no," replied Beautrelet, with a laugh. "Only, it seems to me that there are certain points on which it is not impossible to form an opinion, and others, even, are so precise as to warrant a conclusion." "Oh, but this is becoming very curious, and I shall get to know something at last. For I confess, to my great confusion, that I know nothing." "That is because you have not had time to reflect, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. The great thing is to reflect. Facts very seldom fail to carry their own explanation. And according to you, the facts which we have just ascertained carry their own explanation?" Don't you think so yourself? In any case, I have ascertained none besides those which are set down in the official report. Good. So that, if I were to ask you which were the objects stolen from this room, I should answer that I know. Bravo! My gentleman knows more about it than the owner himself. Monsieur de Gesvres has everything accounted for. Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet has not. He misses a bookcase in 3 sections, and a life-size statue which nobody ever noticed. And if I asked you the name of the murderer, I should again answer that I know it. All present gave a start. The deputy and the journalist drew nearer. Monsieur de Gesvres and the 2 girls, impressed by Beautrelet's tranquil assurance, listened attentively. You know the murderer's name? Yes. And the place where he is concealed, perhaps? Yes. Monsieur Filleul rubbed his hands. What a piece of luck! This capture will do honor to my career. And can you make me these startling revelations now? Yes, now. Or rather, if you do not mind, in an hour or 2, when I shall have assisted at your inquiry to the end. No, no, young man, here and now, please. At that moment, Raymond de Saint Véran, who had not taken her eyes from Isidore Beautrelet since the beginning of this scene, came up to Monsieur Filleul. Monsieur le juge d'instruction. Yes, mademoiselle? She hesitated for 2 or 3 seconds, with her eyes fixed on Beautrelet, and then, addressing M. Filleul, I should like you to ask monsieur the reason why he was walking yesterday in the sunk road which leads up to the little door. It was an unexpected and dramatic stroke. Isidore Beautrelet appeared nonplussed. I, mademoiselle? I? You saw me yesterday? Raymond remained thoughtful, with her eyes upon Beautrelet, as though she were trying to settle her own conviction, and then said in a steady voice, At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as I was crossing the wood, I met in the sunk road a young man of monsieur's height, dressed like him and wearing a beard cut in the same way, and I received a very clear impression that he was trying to hide. And it was I? I could not say that as an absolute certainty, for my recollection is a little vague. Still, I think so. If not, it would be an unusual resemblance. M. Filleul was perplexed, already taken in by one of the Confederates. Was he now going to let himself be tricked by this self-styled schoolboy? Certainly the young man's manner spoke in his favor, but one can never tell. What have you to say, sir? That mademoiselle is mistaken, as I can easily show you with one word. Yesterday, at the time stated, I was at Vuille's. You will have to prove it, you will have to. In any case, the position is not what it was, Sergeant. One of your men will keep monsieur company. Isidore Beautrelet's face denoted a keen vexation. Will it be for long? Long enough to collect the necessary information. Monsieur le juge d'instruction, I beseech you to collect it with all possible speed and discretion. Why? My father is an old man. We are very much attached to each other, and I would not have him suffer on my account. The more or less pathetic note in his voice made a bad impression on Monsieur Filleul. It suggested a scene in a melodrama. Nevertheless, he promised, this evening, or tomorrow at latest, I shall know what to think. The afternoon was wearing on. The examining magistrate returned to the ruins of the cloisters, after giving orders that no unauthorized persons were to be admitted, and patiently, methodically, dividing the ground into lots which were successively explored, himself directed the search. But at the end of the day he was no farther than at the start, and he declared before an army of reporters who, during that time, had invaded the chateau, Gentlemen, everything leads us to suppose that the wounded man is here, within our reach. Everything, that is, except the reality, the fact. Therefore, in our humble opinion, he must have escaped, and we shall find him outside. By way of precaution, however, he arranged with the sergeant of gendarmes for a complete watch to be kept over the park, and, after making a fresh examination of the 2 drawing rooms, visiting the whole of the chateau, and surrounding himself with all the necessary information, he took the road back to Dieppe, accompanied by the deputy prosecutor. Night fell, As the boudoir was to remain locked, Jean Duval's body had been moved to another room. 2 women from the neighborhood sat up with it, assisted by Suzanne and Ramond. Downstairs, young Isidore Beautrelet slept on the bench in the old oratory, under the watchful eye of the village policeman, who had been attached to his person. Outside, the gendarmes, the farmer, and a dozen peasants had taken up their position among the ruins and along the walls. All was still until 11 o'clock, but at 10 minutes past 11, a shot echoed from the other side of the house. "Attention!" roared the sergeant. "2 men remain here. You, Fossier, and you, Lecanu, the others at the double." They all rushed forward and ran round the house on the left. A figure was seen to make away in the dark. Then, suddenly, a second shot drew them farther on, almost to the borders of the farm. And all at once, as they arrived, in a band, at the hedge which lines the orchard, a flame burst out, to the right of the farmhouse, and other flames also rose in a thick column. It was a barn burning, stuffed to the ridge with straw. "The scoundrels!" shouted the sergeant. "They've set fire to it. Have at them, lads! They can't be far away!" But the wind was turning the flames toward the main building, and it became necessary, before all things, to ward off the danger. They all exerted themselves with a greater ardor, inasmuch as M. de Gesvres, hurrying to the scene of the disaster, encouraged them with the promise of a reward. By the time that they had mastered the flames, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. All pursuit would have been vain. "We'll look into it by daylight," said the sergeant. "They are sure to have left traces. We shall find them." "And I shall not be sorry," added Monsieur de Gesvres, "to learn the reason of this attack. To set fire to trusses of straw strikes me as a very useless proceeding. Come with me, Monsieur le Comte. I may be able to tell you the reason." Together they reached the ruins of the cloisters. The sergeant called out, "Lecanu! Fossier!" The other gendarmes were already hunting for their comrades, whom they had left standing sentry. They ended by finding them at a few paces from the little door. The 2 men were lying full length on the ground, bound and gagged, with bandages over their eyes. "Monsieur le Comte," muttered the sergeant, while his men were being released, "Monsieur le Comte, we have been tricked like children." "How so?" "The shots, the attack on the barn, the fire, all so much humbug to get us down there. A diversion. During that time they were tying up our 2 men, and the business was done." "What business?" "Carrying off the wounded man, of course." "You don't mean to say you think?" "Think? Why, it's as plain as a pikestaff. The idea came to me 10 minutes ago, but I'm a fool not to have thought of it earlier. We should have nabbed them all." Quevillon stamped his foot on the ground with a sudden attack of rage. "But where, confound it, where did they go through? Which way did they carry him off? For, dash it all, we beat the ground all day, and a man can't hide in a tuft of grass, especially when he's wounded. It's witchcraft, that's what it is." Nor was this the last surprise awaiting Sergeant Quevillon. At dawn, when they entered the oratory which had been used as a cell for young Isidore Beautrelet, they realized that young Isidore Beautrelet had vanished. On a chair slept the village policeman, bent in 2. By his side stood a water bottle and 2 tumblers. At the bottom of one of those tumblers, a few grains of white powder. On examination, it was proved, first, that young Isidore Beautrelet had administered a sleeping draught to the village policeman. Secondly, that he could only have escaped by a window situated at a height of 7 or 8 feet in the wall. And lastly, a charming detail, this, that he could only have reached this window by using the back of his warder as a footstool. Chapter 2, Isidore, Beautrelet, 6th Form Schoolboy. From the Grand Journal. Latest news. Dr. Delattre kidnapped. A mad piece of criminal daring. At the moment of going to press, we have received an item of news which we dare not guarantee is authentic, because of its very improbable character. We print it, therefore, with all reserve. Yesterday evening, Dr. Delattre, the well-known surgeon, was present, with his wife and daughter, at the performance of Hernani at the Comédie Française. At the commencement of the 3rd act, that is to say, at about 10 o'clock, The door of his box opened, and a gentleman, accompanied by two others, leaned over to the doctor and said to him, in a low voice, but loud enough for Madame Delattre to hear, "Doctor, I have a very painful task to fulfill, and I shall be very grateful to you if you will make it as easy for me as you can." "Who are you, sir?" "Monsieur Thésard, Commissary of Police of the 1st District, and my instructions are to take you to Monsieur Dudois, at the Prefecture." "But, not a word, doctor. I entreat you, not a movement. There is some regrettable mistake, and that is why we must act in silence and not attract anybody's attention. You will be back, I have no doubt, before the end of the performance." The doctor rose and went with the commissary. At the end of the performance, he had not returned. Madame Delattre, greatly alarmed, drove to the office of the Commissary of Police. There she found the real Thésard and discovered, to her great terror, that the individual who had carried off her husband was an impostor. Inquiries made so far have revealed the fact that the doctor stepped into a motor car and that the car drove off in the direction of the Concorde. Readers will find further details of this incredible adventure in our 2nd edition. Incredible though it might be, the adventure was perfectly true. Besides, the issue was not long delayed, and the Grand Journal, while confirming the story in its midday edition, described in a few lines the dramatic ending with which it concluded. The story ends and guesswork begins. Dr. Delattre was brought back to 78 Rue Duret at 9 o'clock this morning in a motor car which drove away immediately at full speed. Number 78, Rue Duret, is the address of Dr. Delattre's clinical surgery, at which he arrives every morning at the same hour. When we sent in our card, the doctor, though closeted with the chief of the detective service, was good enough to consent to receive us. "All that I can tell you," he said in reply to our questions, "is that I was treated with the greatest consideration. My 3 companions were the most charming people I have ever met, exquisitely well-mannered and bright and witty talkers, a quality not to be despised in view of the length of the journey." "How long did it take?" "About 4 hours, and as long returning." "And what was the object of the journey?" "I was taken to see a patient whose condition rendered an immediate operation necessary." "And was the operation successful?" "Yes, but the consequences may be dangerous." "I would answer for the patient here." "Down there, under his present conditions?" "Bad conditions?" "Execrable, a room in an inn, and the practically absolute impossibility of being attended to." "Then what can save him?" "A miracle, and his constitution, which is an exceptionally strong one." "And can you say nothing more about this strange patient?" "No. In the first place, I have taken an oath, and, secondly, I have received a present of 10,000 francs for my free surgery. If I do not keep silence, this sum will be taken from me." "You are joking? Do you believe that?" "Indeed, I do." The men all struck me as being very much in earnest. This is the statement made to us by Dr. Delattre. And we know, on the other hand, that the head of the detective service, in spite of all his insisting, has not yet succeeded in extracting any more precise particulars from him as to the operation which he performed, the patient whom he attended, or the district traversed by the car. It is difficult, therefore, to arrive at the truth. This truth, which the writer of the interview confessed himself unable to discover, was guessed by the more or less clear-sighted minds that perceived a connection with the facts which had occurred the day before at the Château d'Ambrumésy, and which were reported, down to the smallest detail, in all the newspapers of that day. There was evidently a coincidence to be reckoned with in the disappearance of a wounded burglar and the kidnapping of a famous surgeon. The judicial inquiry, moreover, proved the correctness of the hypothesis. By following the track of the sham flyman, who had fled on a bicycle, they were able to show that he had reached the forest of Arques at some 10 miles distance, and that from there, after throwing his bicycle into a ditch, he had gone to the village of Saint Nicolas, whence he had dispatched the following telegram. A. L.N., Post Office 45, Paris. Situation desperate. Operation urgently necessary. sends celebrity by National Road 14. The evidence was undeniable. Once apprised, the accomplices in Paris hastened to make their arrangements. At 10 o'clock in the evening, they sent their celebrity by National Road number 14, which skirts the forest of Arques and ends at Dieppe. During this time, under cover of the fire which they themselves had caused, the gang of burglars carried off their leader and moved him to an inn, where the operation took place on the arrival of the surgeon at 2 o'clock in the morning. About that there was no doubt. At Pontoise, at Gournay, at Forges, Chief Inspector Ganimard, who was sent specially from Paris, with Inspector Folenfant as his assistant, ascertained that a motor car had passed in the course of the previous night. The same on the road from Dieppe to Ambrumésy. And, though the traces of the car were lost at about 1.5 miles from the chateau, at least a number of footmarks were seen between the little door in the park wall and the abbey ruins. Besides, Ganimard remarked that the lock of the little door had been forced, so all was explained. It remained to decide which end the doctor had spoken of. An easy piece of work for a Ganimard, a professional ferret, a patient old stager of the police. The number of ends is limited, and this one, given the condition of the wounded man, could only be one quite close to Ambrumésy. Ganimard and Sergeant Quevillon set to work, within a circle of 500 yards, of 1,000 yards, of 1,500 yards. They visited and ransacked everything that could pass for an inn, but, against all expectation, the dying man persisted in remaining invisible. Ganimard became more resolved than ever. He came back to sleep at the chateau on the Saturday night, with the intention of making his personal inquiry on the Sunday. On Sunday morning he learned that during the night a posse of gendarmes had seen a figure gliding along the sunk road, outside the wall. Was it an accomplice who had come back to investigate? Were they to suppose that the leader of the gang had not left the cloisters or the neighborhood of the cloisters? That night, Ganimard openly sent the squad of gendarmes to the farm, and posted himself and Folenfant outside the walls, near the little door. A little before midnight, a person passed out of the wood, slipped between them, went through the door, and entered the park. For 3 hours they saw him wander from side to side across the ruins, stooping, climbing up the old pillars, sometimes remaining for long minutes without moving. Then he went back to the door and again passed between the two inspectors. Ganimard caught him by the collar, while Folenfant seized him round the body. He made no resistance of any kind, and with the greatest docility allowed them to bind his wrists and take him to the house. But, when they attempted to question him, he replied simply that he owed them no account of his doings, and that he would wait for the arrival of the examining magistrate. Thereupon they fastened him firmly to the foot of a bed in one of the 2 adjoining rooms which they occupied. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, as soon as Monsieur Fiel had arrived, Ganimard announced the capture which he had made. The prisoner was brought downstairs. It was Isidore Beautrelet. "Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet!" exclaimed Monsieur Fiel with an air of rapture, holding out both his hands to the newcomer. "What a delightful surprise! Our excellent amateur detective here, and at our disposal too. Why, it's a windfall, M. Chief Inspector, allow me to introduce to you M. Isidore Beautrelet, a 6th form pupil at the Lycée Janson de Salle." Ganimard seemed a little nonplussed. Isidore made him a very low bow, as though he were greeting a colleague whom he knew how to esteem at his true value, and, turning to Monsieur Filleul, "It appears, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that you have received a satisfactory account of me?" "Perfectly satisfactory. To begin with, you were really at Vaux-les-Roses at the time when Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran thought she saw you in the sunk road. I dare say we shall discover the identity of your double. In the second place, you are in very deed Isidore Beautrelet, a 6th form pupil and, what is more, an excellent pupil, industrious at your work and of exemplary behavior. As your father lives in the country, you go out once a month to his correspondent, Monsieur Bernot, who is lavish in his praises of you. So that you are free, M. Isidore Beautrelet?" "Absolutely free?" "Absolutely. Oh, I must make just one little condition." All the same, you can understand that I can't release a gentleman who administers sleeping draughts, who escapes by the window, and who is afterward caught in the act of trespassing upon private property. I can't release him without a compensation of some kind. I await your pleasure. Well, we will resume our interrupted conversation, and you shall tell me how far you have advanced with your investigations. In 2 days of liberty you must have carried them pretty far? And, as Ganimard was preparing to go, with an affectation of contempt for that sort of practice, the magistrate cried, "Not at all, Monsieur Inspector, your place is here. I assure you that Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet is worth listening to. Isidore Beautrelet, according to my information, has made a great reputation at the Lycée Janson de Sailly as an observer whom nothing escapes, and his schoolfellows, I hear, look upon him as your competitor and a rival of Holmlock Shears." "Indeed," said Ganimard ironically. "Just so. One of them wrote to me, 'If Beautrelet declares that he knows, you must believe him, and whatever he says, you may be sure that it is the exact expression of the truth. Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet, now or never is the time to vindicate the confidence of your friends. I beseech you, give us the exact expression of the truth.'" Isidore listened with a smile and replied, "Monsieur le juge d'instruction, you are very cruel. You make fun of poor schoolboys who amuse themselves as best they can. You are quite right, however, and I will give you no further reason to laugh at me. The fact is that you know nothing, Monsieur Isidore Beautrelet. Yes, I confess in all humility that I know nothing, for I do not call it knowing anything, that I happen to have hit upon 2 or 3 more precise points which, I am sure, cannot have escaped you. For instance, the object of the theft." "Ah, of course, you know the object of the theft." "As you do, I have no doubt. In fact, it was the first thing I studied, because the task struck me as easier." "Easier, really?" "Why, of course, at the most, it's a question of reasoning." "Nothing more than that?" "Nothing more." "And what is your reasoning?" "It is just this, stripped of all extraneous comment. On the one hand, there has been a theft, because the 2 young ladies are agreed, and because they really saw 2 men running away and carrying things with them. There has been a theft. On the other hand, nothing has disappeared, because Monsieur de Gesvres says so, and he is in a better position than anybody to know. Nothing has disappeared. From those 2 premises I arrive at this inevitable result. Granted that there has been a theft and that nothing has disappeared, it is because the object carried off has been replaced by an exactly similar object. Let me hasten to add that possibly my argument may not be confirmed by the facts, but I maintain that it is the first argument that ought to occur to us, and that we are not entitled to waive it until we have made a serious examination." That's true," muttered the magistrate, who was obviously interested. "Now," continued Isidore, "what was there in this room that could arouse the covetousness of the burglars?" "2 things. The tapestry first. It can't have been that. Old tapestry cannot be imitated. The fraud would have been palpable at once. There remain the 4 Rubens pictures." "What's that, you say?" "I say that the 4 Rubenses on that wall are false." "Impossible! They are false a priori, inevitably and without a doubt. I tell you, it's impossible. It is very nearly a year ago, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, since a young man, who gave his name as Charpenais, came to the Château d'Ambrumésy and asked permission to copy the Rubens pictures. Monsieur de Gesvres gave him permission. Every day for 5 months, Charpenais worked in this room from morning till dusk. The copies which he made, canvases and frames, have taken the place of the 4 original pictures bequeathed to Monsieur de Gesvres by his uncle, the Marquis de Bobadilla." "Prove it!" "I have no proof to give. A picture is false because it is false, and I consider that it is not even necessary to examine these 4. Monsieur Filot and Ganimard exchanged glances of unconcealed astonishment. The inspector no longer thought of withdrawing. At last the magistrate muttered, "We must have Monsieur de Gesvres' opinion," and Ganimard agreed, "Yes, we must have his opinion." And they sent to beg the Count to come to the drawing-room. The young sixth-form pupil had won a real victory. To compel two experts, two professionals like M. Filleul and Ganimard, to take account of his surmises implied a testimony of respect, of which any other would have been proud. But Beautrelet seemed not to feel those little satisfactions of self-conceit, and, still smiling without the least trace of irony, he placidly waited. M. de Gesvres entered the room. "Monsieur le Comte," said the magistrate, "the result of our inquiry has brought us face to face with an utterly unexpected contingency which we submit to you with all reserve. It is possible, I say that it is possible, that the burglars, when breaking into the house, had it as their object to steal your 4 pictures by Rubens, or, at least, to replace them by 4 copies which are said to have been made last year by a painter called Charpenais. Would you be so good as to examine the pictures, and to tell us if you recognize them as genuine?" The Count appeared to suppress a movement of annoyance, looked at Isidore Beautrelet and at M. Filleul, and replied, without even troubling to go near the pictures, "I hoped, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that the truth might have remained unknown. As this is not so, I have no hesitation in declaring that the 4 pictures are false." "You knew it, then?" "From the beginning." "Why didn't you say so?" "The owner of a work is never in a hurry to declare that that work is not, or rather is no longer genuine. Still, it was the only means of recovering them. I consider that there was another and a better." "Which was that?" "Not to make the secret known, not to frighten my burglars, and to offer to buy back the pictures which they must find more or less difficult to dispose of." "How would you communicate with them?" As the Count did not reply, Isidore answered for him. "By means of an advertisement in the papers." The paragraph inserted in the agony column of the journal, the Écho de Paris and the Matin, runs, "I'm prepared to buy back the pictures." The Count agreed with a nod. Once again, the young man was teaching his elders. Monsieur Filleul showed himself a good sportsman. "There's no doubt about it, my dear sir," he exclaimed. "I'm beginning to think your schoolfellows were not quite wrong. By Jove, what an eye! What intuition! If this goes on, there will be nothing left for Monsieur Ganimard and me to do." "Oh, none of this part was so very complicated." "You mean to say that the rest was more so?" "I remember, in fact, that when we first met you seemed to know all about it. Let me see, as far as I recollect, you said that you knew the name of the murderer." "So I do." "Well then, who killed Jean Duval? Is the man alive? Where is he hiding? There is a misunderstanding between us, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. Or, rather, you have misunderstood the facts from the beginning. The murderer and the runaway are 2 distinct persons." "What's that?" exclaimed Monsieur Filleul. "The man whom Monsieur de Gesvres saw in the boudoir and struggled with, the man whom the young lady saw in the drawing-room, and whom Mademoiselle de Saint Véran shot at, the man who fell in the park and whom we are looking for. Do you suggest that he is not the man who killed Jean Duval?" "I do." "Have you discovered the traces of a 3rd accomplice who disappeared before the arrival of the young ladies?" "I have not." "In that case, I don't understand." "Well, who is the murderer of Jean Duval?" "Jean Duval was killed by—" Beautrelet interrupted himself, thought for a moment, and continued, "But I must first show you the road which I followed to arrive at the certainty and the very reasons of the murder, without which my accusation would seem monstrous to you." "And it is not—" "No, it is not monstrous at all. There is one detail which has passed unobserved, and which nevertheless is of the greatest importance, and that is that Jean Duval, at the moment when he was stabbed, had all his clothes on, including his walking boots, was dressed, in short, as a man is dressed in the middle of the day, with a waistcoat, collar, tie, and braces. Now the crime was committed at 4 o'clock in the morning." "I reflected on that strange fact," said the magistrate. "And Monsieur de Gesvres replied that Jean Duval spent a part of his nights in working." The servants say, on the contrary, that he went to bed regularly at a very early hour. But, admitting that he was up, why did he disarrange his bedclothes to make believe that he had gone to bed? And if he was in bed, why, when he heard a noise, did he take the trouble to dress himself from head to foot instead of slipping on anything that came to hand? I went to his room on the first day. While you were at lunch, his slippers were at the foot of the bed. What prevented him from putting them on rather than his heavy-nailed boots? So far, I do not see... So far, in fact, you cannot see anything, except anomalies. They appeared much more suspicious to me, however, when I learned that Charpenais the painter, the man who copied the Rubens pictures, had been introduced and recommended to the Comte de Gesvres by Jean Daval himself. Well, from that to the conclusion that Jean Daval and Charpenais were accomplices required but a step. I took that step at the time of our conversation. A little quickly, I think. As a matter of fact, a material proof was wanted. Now I had discovered in Daval's room, on one of the sheets of the blotting pad on which he used to write, this address: Monsieur A.L.N., Post Office 45, Paris. You will find it there still, traced the reverse way on the blotting paper. The next day, it was discovered that the telegram sent by the sham flyman from St. Nicolas bore the same address: A.L.N., Post Office 45. The material proof existed. Jean Daval was in correspondence with the gang which arranged the robbery of the pictures. Monsieur Fialor raised no objection. Agreed. The complicity is established. And what conclusion do you draw? This, first of all, that it was not the runaway who killed Jean Daval, because Jean Daval was his accomplice. And after that? Monsieur le juge d'instruction, I will ask you to remember the first sentence uttered by Monsieur le Comte when he recovered from fainting. The sentence forms part of Mademoiselle de Gesvres' evidence and is in the official report. I am not wounded. Daval? Is he alive? The knife? And I will ask you to compare it with that part of his story, also in the report, in which Monsieur le Comte describes the assault. The man leaped at me and felled me with a blow on the temple. How could Monsieur de Gesvres, who had fainted, know, on waking, that Daval had been stabbed with a knife? Isidore Beautrelet did not wait for an answer to his question. It seemed as though he were in a hurry to give the answer himself, and to avoid all comment. He continued, straightway. Therefore it was Jean Daval who brought the 3 burglars to the drawing-room. While he was there with the one whom they call their chief, a noise was heard in the boudoir. Daval opened the door. Recognizing Monsieur de Gesvres, he rushed at him, armed with the knife. Monsieur de Gesvres succeeded in snatching the knife from him, struck him with it, and himself fell, on receiving a blow from the man whom the 2 girls were to see a few minutes after. Once again, Monsieur Fiol and the inspector exchanged glances. Ganimard tossed his head in a disconcerted way. The magistrate said, Monsieur le Comte, am I to believe that this version is correct? Monsieur de Gesvres made no answer. Come, Monsieur le Comte, your silence would allow us to suppose. I beg you to speak. Replying in a very clear voice, Monsieur de Gesvres said, The version is correct in every particular. The magistrate gave a start. Then I cannot understand why you misled the police. Why conceal an act which you were lawfully entitled to commit in defense of your life? For 20 years, said Monsieur de Gesvres, Daval worked by my side. I trusted him. If he betrayed me as the result of some temptation or other, I was at least unwilling for the sake of the past that his treachery should become known. You were unwilling, I agree, but you had no right to be. I am not of your opinion, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. As long as no innocent person was accused of the crime, I was absolutely entitled to refrain from accusing the man who was at the same time the culprit and the victim. He is dead. I consider death a sufficient punishment. But now, Monsieur le Comte, now that the truth is known, you can speak. Yes, here are 2 rough drafts of letters written by him to his accomplices. I took them from his pocketbook a few minutes after his death. And the motive of his theft? Go to 18 Rue de la Barre at Dieppe, which is the address of a certain Madame Verdier. It was for this woman, whom he got to know 2 years ago, and to supply her constant need of money that Duval turned thief. So everything was cleared up. The tragedy rose out of the darkness and gradually appeared in its true light. "Let us go on," said Monsieur Feuel after the Count had withdrawn. "Upon my word," said Beautrelet gaily, "I have said almost all that I had to say." "But the runaway? The wounded man?" "As to that, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, you know as much as I do. You have followed his tracks in the grass by the cloisters. You have—" Yes, I know. But since then, his friends have removed him, and what I want is a clue or two as regards that inn." Isidore Beautrelet burst out laughing. "The inn! The inn does not exist. It's an invention, a trick to put the police on the wrong scent. An ingenious trick, too, for it seems to have succeeded. But Dr. Delattre declares—" "Ah, that's just it," cried Beautrelet, in a tone of conviction. "It is just because Dr. Delattre declares that we mustn't believe him. Why, Dr. Delattre refused to give any but the vaguest details concerning his adventure. He refused to say anything that might compromise his patient's safety. And suddenly he calls attention to an inn. You may be sure that he talked about that inn because he was told to. You may be sure that the whole story which he dished up to us was dictated to him under the threat of terrible reprisals. The doctor has a wife. The doctor has a daughter. He is too fond of them to disobey people of whose formidable power he has seen proofs. And that is why he has assisted your efforts by supplying the most precise clues, so precise that the inn is nowhere to be found, so precise that you have never ceased looking for it in the face of all probability, and that your eyes have been turned away from the only spot where the man can be, the mysterious spot which he has not left, which he has been unable to leave ever since the moment when, wounded by Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, he succeeded in dragging himself to it, like a beast to its lair. But where? Confound it all! In what corner of Hades? In the ruins of the old abbey. But there are no ruins left. A few bits of wall. A few broken columns. That's where he's gone to earth. Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, shouted Beautrelet. That's where you will have to look for him. It's there, and nowhere else, that you will find Arsène Lupin. Arsène Lupin! Yelled Monsieur Feuel, springing to his feet. There was a rather solemn pause, amid which the syllables of the famous name seemed to prolong their sound. Was it possible that the vanquished and yet invisible adversary, whom they had been hunting in vain for several days, could really be Arsène Lupin? Arsène Lupin, caught in a trap, arrested, meant immediate promotion, fortune, glory to any examining magistrate. Ganimard had not moved a limb. Isidore said to him, "You agree with me, do you not, Inspector?" "Of course I do." "You have not doubted either for a moment, have you, that he managed this business?" "Not for a second. The thing bears his signature. A move of Arsène Lupin's is as different from a move made by another man as one face is from another. You have only to open your eyes." "Do you think so? Do you think so?" said Monsieur Feuel. "Think so," cried the young man. "Look, here's one little fact. What are the initials under which those men correspond among themselves? A.L.N., that is to say, the first letter of the name Arsène, and the first and last letters of the name Lupin." "Ah," said Ganimard, "nothing escapes you. Upon my word, you're a fine fellow, and old Ganimard lays down his arms before you." Beautrelet flushed with pleasure and pressed the hand which the chief inspector held out to him. The three men had drawn near the balcony, and their eyes now took in the extent of the ruins. Monsieur Feuel muttered, "So he ought to be there." "He is there," said Beautrelet in a hollow voice. "He has been there ever since the moment when he fell. Logically and practically, he could not escape without being seen by Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran and the two servants." "What proof have you?" "His accomplices have furnished the proof. On the very morning, one of them disguised himself as a flyman and drove you here to recover the cap, which would serve to identify him. Very well, but also, and more particularly, to examine the spot, find out and see for himself what had become of the governor. And did he find out? I presume so, as he knew the hiding place, and I presume that he became aware of the desperate condition of his chief, because, under the impulse of his alarm, he committed the imprudence to write that threat. Woe betide the young lady if she has killed the governor! But his friends were able to take him away afterward? When? Your men have never left the ruins, and where could they have moved him to? At most, a few hundred yards away, for one doesn't let a dying man travel, and then you would have found him. No, I tell you, he is there. His friends would never have removed him from the safest of hiding places. It was there that they brought the doctor, while the gendarmes were running to the fire like children. But how is he living? How will he keep alive? To keep alive, you need food and drink. I can't say. I don't know. But he is there, I will swear it. He is there because he can't help being there. I am as sure of it as if I touched him. He is there. With his finger outstretched toward the ruins, he traced in the air a little circle, which became smaller and smaller until it was only a point. And that point his two companions sought desperately, both leaning into space, both moved by the same faith in Beautrelet, and quivering with the ardent conviction which he had forced upon them. Yes, Arsène Lupin was there. In theory and in fact, he was there. Neither of them was now able to doubt it. And there was something impressive and tragic in knowing that the famous adventurer was lying in some dark shelter, below the ground, helpless, feverish, and exhausted. "And if he dies?" asked Monsieur Filou in a low voice. "If he dies," said Beautrelet, "and if his accomplices are sure of it, then see to the safety of Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, for the vengeance will be terrible." A few minutes later, and in spite of the entreaties of Monsieur Filou, who would gladly have made further use of this fascinating auxiliary, Isidore Beautrelet, whose holidays ended that day, went off by the Dieppe road. He stepped from the train in Paris at 5 o'clock and, at 8 o'clock, returned to the Lycée Janson together with his schoolfellows. Ganimard, after a minute, but utterly useless exploration of the ruins of Ambrumésy, returned to Paris by the fast night train. On reaching his apartment in the Rue Pergolese, he found an express letter awaiting him. Monsieur l'inspecteur principal, finding that I had a little time to spare at the end of the day, I have succeeded in collecting a few additional particulars which are sure to interest you. Arsène Lupin has been living in Paris for 12 months under the name of Étienne de Vaudreuil. It is a name which you will often come across in the society notes or the sporting columns of the newspapers. He is a great traveler and is absent for long periods, during which, by his own account, he goes hunting tigers in Bengal or blue foxes in Siberia. He is supposed to be in business of some kind, although nobody is able to say for certain what his business is. His present address is 38 Rue Marbeuf, and I will call your attention to the fact that the Rue Marbeuf is close to Post Office number 45. Since Thursday the 23rd of April, the day before the burglary at Ambrumésy, there has been no news at all of Étienne de Vaudreuil. With very many thanks for the kindness which you have shown me, believe me to be, Monsieur l'Inspecteur Principal, yours sincerely, Isidore Beautrelet. P.S. Please on no account think that it cost me any great trouble to obtain this information. On the very morning of the crime, while M. Thiol was pursuing his examination before a few privileged persons, I had the fortunate inspiration to glance at the runaway's cap before the sham flyman came to change it. The hatter's name was enough, as you may imagine, to enable me to find the clue that led to the identification of the purchaser and his address. The next morning, Ganimard called at 36 Rue Marbeuf. After questioning the concierge, he made him open the door of the ground-floor flat on the right, a very comfortable apartment, elegantly furnished, in which, however, he discovered nothing beyond some cinders in the fireplace. 2 friends had come 4 days earlier to burn all compromising papers. But, just as he was leaving, Ganimard passed the postman, who was bringing a letter for M. de Vaudreuil. That afternoon, the public prosecutor was informed of the case and ordered the letter to be given up. It bore an American postmark and contained the following lines, in English. Dear Sir, I write to confirm the answer which I gave your representative. As soon as you have Monsieur de Gèves' 4 pictures in your possession, you can forward them as arranged. You may add the rest, if you are able to succeed, which I doubt. An unexpected business requires my presence in Europe, and I shall reach Paris at the same time as this letter. You will find me at the Grand Hotel. Yours faithfully, Ephraim B. Harlington. That same day, Ganimard applied for a warrant and took Mr. E. B. Harlington, an American citizen, to the police station on a charge of receiving and conspiracy. Thus, within the space of 24 hours, all the threads of the plot had been unraveled, thanks to the really unforeseen clues supplied by a schoolboy of 17. In 24 hours, what had seemed inexplicable became simple and clear. In 24 hours, the scheme devised by the accomplices to save their leader was baffled. The capture of Arsène Lupin, wounded and dying, was no longer in doubt. His gang was disorganized. The address of his establishment in Paris and the name which he assumed were known, and, for the first time, one of his cleverest and most carefully elaborated feats was seen through before he had been able to ensure its complete execution. An immense clamor of astonishment, admiration, and curiosity arose among the public. Already the Rouen journalist, in a very able article, had described the first examination of the 6th form pupil, laying stress upon his personal charm, his simplicity of manner, and his quiet assurance. The indiscretions of Ganimard and Monsieur Filleul, indiscretions to which they yielded in spite of themselves, under an impulse that proved stronger than their professional pride, suddenly enlightened the public as to the part played by Isidore Beautrelet in recent events. He alone had done everything. To him alone the merit of the victory was due. The excitement was intense. Isidore Beautrelet awoke to find himself a hero, and the crowd, suddenly infatuated, insisted upon the fullest information regarding its new favorite. The reporters were there to supply it. They rushed to the assault of the Lycée Janson de Saly, waited for the day boarders to come out after school hours, and picked up all that related, however remotely, to Beautrelet. It was in this way that they learned the reputation which he enjoyed among his schoolfellows, who called him the rival of Holmlock Shears. Thanks to his powers of logical reasoning, with no further data than those which he was able to gather from the papers, he had, time after time, proclaimed the solution of very complicated cases long before they were cleared up by the police. It had become a game at the Lycée Janson to put difficult questions and intricate problems to Beautrelet, and it was astonishing to see with what unhesitating and analytical power, and by means of what ingenious deductions, he made his way through the thickest darkness. 10 days before the arrest of Jurice the grocer, he showed what could be done with the famous umbrella. In the same way, he declared from the beginning, in the matter of the St. Cloud mystery, that the concierge was the only possible murderer. But most curious of all was the pamphlet which was found circulating among the boys at the school, a typewritten pamphlet signed by Beautrelet and manifolded to the number of 10 copies. It was entitled Arsène Lupin and His Method, showing in how far the latter is based upon tradition and in how far original, followed by a comparison between English humor and French irony. It contained a profound study of each of the exploits of Arsène Lupin, throwing the illustrious burglar's operations into extraordinary relief, showing the very mechanism of his way of setting to work, his special tactics, his letters to the press, his threats, the announcement of his thefts, in short, the whole bag of tricks which he employed to bamboozle his selected victim, and throw him into such a state of mind that the victim almost offered himself to the plot contrived against him, and that everything took place, as it were, with his own consent. And the work was so just, regarded as a piece of criticism, so penetrating, so lively, and marked by a wit so clever and, at the same time, so cruel, that the lawyers at once passed over to his side, that the sympathy of the crowd was summarily transferred from Lupin to Beautrelet, and that, in the struggle engaged upon between the two, the schoolboy's victory was loudly proclaimed in advance. Be this as it may, both Monsieur Filleul and the Paris public prosecutor seemed jealously to reserve the possibility of this victory for him. On the one hand, they failed to establish Mr. Harlington's identity, or to furnish a definite proof of his connection with Lupin's gang. Confederate or not, he preserved an obstinate silence. Nay, more, after examining his handwriting, it was impossible to declare that he was the author of the intercepted letter. A Mr. Harlington, carrying a small portmanteau and a pocketbook stuffed with banknotes, had taken up his abode at the Grand Hotel. That was all that could be stated with certainty. On the other hand, at Dieppe, Monsieur Filleul lay down on the positions which Beautrelet had won for him. He did not move a step forward. Around the individual whom Mademoiselle de Saint Véran had taken for Beautrelet, on the eve of the crime, the same mystery reigned as heretofore. The same obscurity also surrounded everything connected with the removal of the 4 Rubens pictures. What had become of them? And what road had been taken by the motor car in which they were carried off during the night? Evidence of its passing was obtained at Luneray, at Yerville, at Yvetot, and at Caudebec-en-Caux, where it must have crossed the Seine at daybreak in the steam ferry. But, when the matter came to be inquired into more thoroughly, it was stated that the motor car was an uncovered one, and that it would have been impossible to pack 4 large pictures into it unobserved by the ferryman. It was very probably the same car, but then the question cropped up again. What had become of the 4 Rubenses? These were so many problems which Monsieur Filleul unanswered. Every day his subordinates searched the quadrilateral of the ruins. Almost every day he came to direct the explorations. But between that and discovering the refuge in which Lupin lay dying, if it were true that Beautrelet's opinion was correct, there was a gulf fixed which the worthy magistrate did not seem likely to cross. And so it was natural that they should turn once more to Isidore Beautrelet, as he alone had succeeded in dispelling shadows which, in his absence, gathered thicker and more impenetrable than ever. Why did he not go on with the case? Seeing how far he had carried it, he required but an effort to succeed. The question was put to him by a member of the staff of the Grand Journal, who had obtained admission to the Lycée Johnson by assuming the name of Bernot, the friend of Beautrelet's father. And Isidore very sensibly replied, "My dear sir, there are other things besides Lupin in this world, other things besides stories about burglars and detectives. There is, for instance, the thing which is known as taking one's degree. Now I am going up for my examination in July. This is May. And I don't want to be plucked. What would my worthy parents say? But what would he say if you delivered Arsène Lupin into the hands of the police? Tut, there's a time for everything. In the next holidays? Whitsuntide? Yes, I shall go down on Saturday the 6th of June by the first train, and on the evening of that Saturday Lupin will be taken. Will you give me until the Sunday? Asked Beautrelet, laughing. Why delay? Replied the journalist quite seriously. This inexplicable confidence, born of yesterday and already so strong, was felt with regard to the young man by one and all, even though, in reality, events had justified it only up to a certain point. No matter, people believed in him. Nothing seemed difficult to him. They expected from him what they were entitled to expect at most, from some phenomenon of penetration and intuition, of experience and skill. That day of the 6th of June was made to sprawl over all the papers. On the 6th of June, Isidore Beautrelet would take the fast train to Dieppe, and Lupin would be arrested on the same evening. Unless he escapes between this and then, objected the last remaining partisans of the adventurer. Impossible. Every outlet is watched. Unless he has succumbed to his wounds then, said the partisans, who would have preferred their hero's death to his capture, and the retort was immediate. Nonsense! If Lupin were dead, his confederates would know it by now, and Lupin would be revenged. Beautrelet said so. and the 6th of June came. Half a dozen journalists were looking out for Isidore at the Gare Saint-Lazare. 2 of them wanted to accompany him on his journey. He begged them to refrain. He started alone, therefore, in a compartment to himself. He was tired, thanks to a series of nights devoted to study, and soon fell asleep. He slept heavily. In his dreams, he had an impression that the train stopped at different stations and that people got in and out. When he awoke, within sight of Rouen, he was still alone. But on the back of the opposite seat was a large sheet of paper fastened with a pin to the gray cloth. It bore these words: "Every man should mind his own business. Do you mind yours? If not, you must take the consequences." "Capital!" he exclaimed, rubbing his hands with delight. "Things are going badly in the adversary's camp. That threat is as stupid and vulgar as the sham flyman's. What a style! One can see that it wasn't composed by Lupin." The train threaded the tunnel that precedes the old Norman city. On reaching the station, Isidore took a few turns on the platform to stretch his legs. He was about to re-enter his compartment when a cry escaped him. As he passed the bookstall, he had read, in an absent-minded way, the following lines on the front page of a special edition of the Journal de Rouen, and their alarming sense suddenly burst upon him. "Stop press news! We hear by telephone from Dieppe that the Château d'Ambrumésy was broken into last night by criminals who bound and gagged Mademoiselle de Gèvres and carried off Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. Traces of blood have been seen at a distance of 500 yards from the house, and a scarf has been found close by, which is also stained with blood. There is every reason to fear that the poor young girl has been murdered." Isidore Beautrelet completed his journey to Dieppe without moving a limb. Bent in two, with his elbows on his knees and his hands plastered against his face, he sat thinking. At Dieppe he took a fly. At the door of Ambrumésy he met the examining magistrate, who confirmed the horrible news. "You know nothing more?" asked Beautrelet. "Nothing. I have only just arrived." At that moment the sergeant of gendarmes came up to Monsieur Filleul and handed him a crumpled, torn, and discolored piece of paper, which he had picked up not far from the place where the scarf was found. M. Filleul looked at it and gave it to Beautrelet, saying, "I don't suppose this will help us much in our investigations." Isidore turned the paper over and over. It was covered with figures, dots and signs, and presented the exact appearance reproduced below. Chapter 3. The corpse. At 6 o'clock in the evening, having finished all he had to do, Monsieur Filleul, accompanied by Monsieur Brédoux, his clerk, stood waiting for the carriage which was to take him back to Dieppe. He seemed restless, nervous. Twice over he asked, "You haven't seen anything of young Beautrelet, I suppose?" "No, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, I can't say I have." "Where on earth can he be? I haven't set eyes on him all day." Suddenly he had an idea, handed his portfolio to Brédoux, ran round the chateau, and made for the ruins. Isidore Beautrelet was lying near the cloisters, flat on his face, with one arm folded under his head, on the ground carpeted with pine needles. He seemed drowsing. "Hello, young man, what are you doing here? Are you asleep?" "I'm not asleep. I've been thinking." "Ever since this morning?" "Ever since this morning." "It's not a question of thinking. One must see into things first, study facts, look for clues, establish connecting links. The time for thinking comes after, when one pieces all that together and discovers the truth." "Yes, I know. That's the usual way, the right one, I dare say. Mine is different. I think first I try, above all, to get the general hang of the case, if I may so express myself. Then I imagine a reasonable and logical hypothesis which fits in with the general idea, and then, and not before, I examine the facts to see if they agree with my hypothesis. That's a funny method, and a terribly complicated one. It's a sure method, Monsieur Filleul, which is more than can be said of yours. Come, come, facts are facts. With your ordinary sort of adversary, yes. But, given an enemy endowed with a certain amount of cunning, the facts are those which he happens to have selected. Take the famous clues upon which you base your inquiry. Why, he was at liberty to arrange them as he liked. And you see where that can lead you, into what mistakes and absurdities, when you are dealing with a man like Arsène Lupin. Holmlock Shears himself fell into the trap. Arsène Lupin is dead. No matter. His gang remains, and the pupils of such a master are masters themselves. M. Philil took Isidore by the arm and, leading him away, "Words, young man, words. Here is something of more importance. Listen to me." Ganimard is otherwise engaged at this moment, and will not be here for a few days. On the other hand, the Comte de Gevres has telegraphed to Holmlock Shears, who has promised his assistance next week. Now don't you think, young man, that it would be a feather in our cap if we were able to say to those two celebrities, on the day of their arrival, "Awfully sorry, gentlemen, but we couldn't wait. The business is done"? It was impossible for Monsieur Philol to confess helplessness with greater candor. Beautrelet suppressed a smile and, pretending not to see through the worthy magistrate, replied, "I confess, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, that, if I was not present at your inquiry just now, it was because I hoped that you would consent to tell me the results. May I ask what you have learned?" Well, last night at 11 o'clock, the 3 gendarmes whom Sergeant Quevillon had left on guard at the chateau received a note from the sergeant telling them to hasten with all speed to Ouville, where they are stationed. They at once rode off, and when they arrived at Ouville, they discovered that they had been tricked, that the order was a forgery, and that there was nothing for them to do but return to Ambrumésy. This they did, accompanied by Sergeant Quevillon. But they were away for an hour and a half, and during this time the crime was committed. In what circumstances? Very simple circumstances, indeed. A ladder was removed from the farm buildings and placed against the second story of the chateau. A pane of glass was cut out and a window opened. 2 men carrying a dark lantern entered Mademoiselle de Gesvres' room and gagged her before she could cry out. Then, after binding her with cords, they softly opened the door of the room in which Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran was sleeping. Mademoiselle de Gesvres heard a stifled moan, followed by the sound of a person struggling. A moment later, she saw 2 men carrying her cousin, who was also bound and gagged. They passed in front of her and went out through the window. Then Mademoiselle de Gesvres, terrified and exhausted, fainted. But what about the dogs? I thought Monsieur de Gesvres had bought 2 almost wild sheepdogs which were let loose at night. They were found dead, poisoned. By whom? Nobody could get near them. It's a mystery. The fact remains that the 2 men crossed the ruins without let or hindrance, and went out by the little door which we have heard so much about. They passed through the copsewood, following the line of the disused quarries. It was not until they were nearly half a mile from the chateau, at the foot of the tree known as the Great Oak, that they stopped and executed their purpose. If they came with the intention of killing Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, why didn't they murder her in her room? I don't know. Perhaps the incident that settled their determination only occurred after they had left the house. Perhaps the girl succeeded in releasing herself from her bonds. In my opinion, the scarf which was picked up was used to fasten her wrists. In any case, the blow was struck at the foot of the Great Oak. I have collected indisputable proofs. But the body. The body has not been found, but there is nothing excessively surprising in that. As a matter of fact, the trail which I followed brought me to the church at Varangeville and the old cemetery perched on the top of the cliff. From there it is a sheer precipice, a fall of over 300 feet to the rocks and the sea below. In a day or 2, a stronger tide than usual will cast up the body on the beach. Obviously, this is all very simple. Yes, it is all very simple, and doesn't trouble me in the least. Lupin is dead, his accomplices heard of it, and to revenge themselves have killed Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. These are facts which did not even require checking. But Lupin? What about him? What has become of him? In all probability, his confederates removed his corpse at the same time that they carried away the girl, but what proof have we? None at all. Any more than of his staying in the ruins, or of his death, or of his life. And that is the real mystery, Monsieur Beautrelet. The murder of Mademoiselle Raymonde solves nothing. On the contrary, it only complicates matters. What has been happening during the past 2 months at the Château d'Ambermésy? If we don't clear up the riddle, young man, others will give us the go-by. On what day are those others coming? Wednesday to Tuesday, perhaps? Beautrelet seemed to be making an inward calculation, and then declared, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, this is Saturday. I have to be back at school on Monday evening. Well, if you will have the goodness to be here at 10 o'clock exactly on Monday morning, I will try to give you the key to the riddle. Really, Monsieur Beautrelet, do you think so? Are you sure? I hope so, at any rate. And where are you going now? I am going to see if the facts consent to fit in with the general theory which I am beginning to perceive. And if they don't fit in, well, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, said Beautrelet with a laugh, then it will be their fault, and I must look for others which will prove more tractable. Till Monday, then? Till Monday. A few minutes later, Monsieur Filleul was driving toward Dieppe, while Isidore mounted a bicycle which he had borrowed from the Comte de Gesvres, and rode off along the road to Yerville and Caudebec-en-Caux. There was one point in particular on which the young man was anxious to form a clear opinion, because this just appeared to him to be the enemy's weakest point. Objects of the size of the 4 Rubens pictures cannot be juggled away. They were bound to be somewhere. Granting that it was impossible to find them for the moment, might one not discover the road by which they had disappeared? What Beautrelet surmised was that the 4 pictures had undoubtedly been carried off in the motor car, but that, before reaching Caudebec, they were transferred to another car, which had crossed the Seine either above Caudebec or below it. Now the first horseboat down the stream was at Quillebeuf, a greatly frequented ferry and, consequently, dangerous. Upstream there was the ferry boat at La Mairie, a large but lonely market town, lying well off the main road. By midnight, Isidore had covered the 35 or 40 miles to La Mailleraie and was knocking at the door of an inn by the waterside. He slept there and, in the morning, questioned the ferryman. They consulted the counterfoils in the traffic book. No motor car had crossed on Thursday, the 23rd of April. A horse-drawn vehicle, then? Suggested Beautrelet. A cart? A van? No, not either. Isidore continued his inquiries all through the morning. He was on the point of leaving for Quillebeuf, when the waiter of the inn at which he had spent the night said, I came back from my 13 days' training on the morning of which you are speaking, and I saw a cart, but it did not go across. Really? No. They unloaded it onto a flat boat, a barge of sorts which was moored to the wharf. And where did the cart come from? Oh, I knew it at once. It belonged to Master Vatinel, the carter. And where does he live? At Louveteaux. Beautrelet consulted his military map. The hamlet of Louveteaux lay where the high road between Yvetot and Caudebec was crossed by a little winding road that ran through the woods to La Mailleraie. Not until 6 o'clock in the evening did Isidore succeed in discovering Master Vatinel in a pothouse. Master Vatinel was one of those artful old Normans who are always on their guard, who distrust strangers, but who are unable to resist the lure of a gold coin or the influence of a glass or two. Well, yes, sir. The men in the motor car that morning had told me to meet them at 5 o'clock at the crossroads. They gave me 4 great, big things, as high as that. One of them went with me, and we carted the things to the barge. You speak of them as if you knew them before. I should think I did know them. It was the 6th time they were employing me. Isidore gave a start. The 6th time, you say? And since when? Why, every day before that one, to be sure. But it was other things then, great blocks of stone, or else smaller, longish ones wrapped up in newspapers, which they carried as if they were worth I don't know what. Oh, I mustn't touch those on any account. But what's the matter? You've turned quite white. Nothing. The heat of the room. Beautrelet staggered out into the air. The joy, the surprise of the discovery, made him feel giddy. He went back very quietly to Varengeville, slept in the village, spent an hour at the mayor's offices with the schoolmaster, and returned to the chateau. There he found a letter awaiting him, care of Monsieur le Comte de Gesvres. It consisted of a single line. Second warning, hold your tongue. If not... Come, he muttered. I shall have to make up my mind and take a few precautions for my personal safety. If not, as they say, it was 9 o'clock. He strolled about among the ruins and then lay down near the cloisters and closed his eyes. Well, young man, are you satisfied with the results of your campaign? It was Monsieur Filleul. Delighted, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. By which you mean to say? By which I mean to say that I am prepared to keep my promise, in spite of this very uninviting letter. He showed the letter to M. Filleul. Pooh, stuff and nonsense, cried the magistrate. I hope you won't let that prevent you from telling you what I know? No, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, I have given my word, and I shall keep it. In less than 10 minutes, you shall know a part of the truth. A part? Yes, in my opinion, Lupin's hiding place does not constitute the whole of the problem. Far from it. But we shall see later on. Monsieur Beautrelet, nothing that you do could astonish me now. But how were you able to discover? Oh, in a very natural way. In the letter from old man Harlington to M. Etienne de Vaudreuil, or rather to Lupin. The intercepted letter? Yes, there is a phrase which always puzzled me. After saying that the pictures are to be forwarded as arranged, he goes on to say, you may add the rest, if you are able to succeed, which I doubt. Yes, I remember. What was this rest? A work of art? A curiosity? The chateau contains nothing of any value besides the Rubenses and the tapestries. Jewelry. There is very little, and what there is of it is not worth much. In that case, what could it be? On the other hand, was it conceivable that people so prodigiously clever as Lupin should not have succeeded in adding the rest, which they themselves had evidently suggested? A difficult undertaking, very likely. Exceptional, surprising, I dare say, but possible, and therefore certain, since Lupin wished it. And yet he failed. Nothing has disappeared. He did not fail. Something has disappeared. Yes, the Rubenses. But the Rubenses and something besides, something which has been replaced by a similar thing, as in the case of the Rubenses, something much more uncommon, much rarer, much more valuable than the Rubenses. Well, what? You're killing me with this procrastination. While talking, the two men had crossed the ruins, turned toward the little door, and were now walking beside the chapel. Beautrelet stopped. Do you really want to know, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction? Of course I do. Beautrelet was carrying a walking stick, a strong, knotted stick. Suddenly, with a backstroke of this stick, he smashed one of the little statues that adorned the front of the chapel. Why, you're mad! Shouted Monsieur Filleul, beside himself, rushing at the broken pieces of the statue. You're mad! That old saint was an admirable bit of work! An admirable bit of work! Echoed Isidore, giving a whirl which brought down the Virgin Mary. M. Filleul took hold of him round the body. Young man, I won't allow you to commit. A wise man of the East came toppling to the ground, followed by a manger containing the mother and child. If you stir another limb, I fire. The Comte de Gesvres had appeared upon the scene and was cocking his revolver. Beautrelet burst out laughing. That's right, Monsieur le Comte. Blaze away. Take a shot at them, as if you were at a fair. Wait a bit. This chap carrying his head in his hands. St. John the Baptist fell, shattered to pieces. Oh, shouted the Count, pointing his revolver. You young vandal, those masterpieces. Sham, Monsieur le Comte. What? What's that? Roared Monsieur Filleul, wresting the Comte de Gesvres' weapon from him. Sham, repeated Beautrelet. Paper pulp and plaster. Oh, nonsense. It can't be true. Hollow plaster, I tell you. Nothing at all. The Count stooped and picked up a sliver of a statuette. Look at it, Monsieur le Comte, and see for yourself. It's plaster. Rusty, musty, mildewed plaster, made to look like old stone. But plaster for all that. Plaster casts. That's all that remains of your perfect masterpiece. That's what they've done in just a few days. That's what the Sieur Charpenais, who copied the Rubenses, prepared a year ago. He seized Monsieur Filleul's arm in his turn. What do you think of it, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction? Isn't it fine? Isn't it grand? Isn't it gorgeous? The chapel has been removed. A whole Gothic chapel collected stone by stone. A whole population of statues captured and replaced by these chaps in stucco. One of the most magnificent specimens of an incomparable artistic period confiscated. The chapel, in short, stolen. Isn't it immense? Ah, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, what a genius the man is. You're allowing yourself to be carried away, Monsieur Beautrelet. One can't be carried away too much, monsieur, when one has to do with people like that. Everything above the average deserves our admiration, and this man soars above everything. There is in his flight a wealth of imagination, a force and power, a skill and freedom that send a thrill through me. Pity he's dead, said Monsieur Filleul with a grin. He'd have ended by stealing the towers of Notre Dame. Isidore shrugged his shoulders. Don't laugh, monsieur. He upsets you, dead though he may be. I don't say not, Monsieur Beautrelet. I confess that I feel a certain excitement now that I am about to set eyes on him, unless, indeed, his friends have taken away the body. And always admitting, observed the Comte de Gesvres, that it was really he who was wounded by my poor niece. It was he, beyond a doubt, Monsieur le Comte, declared Beautrelet. It was he, believe me, who fell in the ruins under the shot fired by Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran. It was he whom she saw rise and who fell again and dragged himself toward the cloisters to rise again for the last time, this by a miracle which I will explain to you presently, to rise again for the last time and reach this stone shelter, which was to be his tomb. And Beautrelet struck the threshold of the chapel with his stick. Eh? What? Cried Monsieur Filleul, taken aback. His tomb? Do you think that impenetrable hiding place? It was here, there, he repeated, but we searched it. Badly. There is no hiding place here, protested Monsieur de Gesvres. I know the chapel. Yes, there is, Monsieur le Comte. Go to the mayor's office at Varangeville, where they have collected all the papers that used to be in the old parish of Ambrumésy, and you will learn from those papers, which belong to the 18th century, that there is a crypt below the chapel. This crypt doubtless dates back to the Roman chapel, upon the site of which the present one was built. But how can Lupin have known this detail? Asked Monsieur Filleul. In a very simple manner, because of the works which he had to execute to take away the chapel. Come, Monsieur Beautrelet, you're exaggerating. He has not taken away the whole chapel. Look, not one of the stones of this top course has been touched. Obviously, he cast and took away only what had a financial value. The wrought stones, the sculptures, the statuettes, the whole treasure of little columns and carved arches. He did not trouble about the groundwork of the building itself. The foundations remain. Therefore, Monsieur Beautrelet, Lupin was not able to make his way into the crypt. At that moment, Monsieur de Gesvres, who had been to call a servant, returned with the key of the chapel. He opened the door. The three men entered. After a short examination, Beautrelet said, The flagstones on the ground have been respected, as one might expect, but it is easy to perceive that the high altar is nothing more than a cast. Now generally the staircase leading to the crypt opens in front of the high altar and passes under it. What do you conclude? I conclude that Lupin discovered the crypt when working at the altar. The Count sent for a pickaxe, and Beautrelet attacked the altar. The plaster flew to right and left. He pushed the pieces aside as he went on. By Jove, muttered M. Filleul, I am eager to know. So am I, said Beautrelet, whose face was pale with anguish. He hurried his blows. And, suddenly, his pickaxe, which until then had encountered no resistance, struck against a harder material and rebounded. There was a sound of something falling in, and all that remained of the altar went tumbling into the gap after the block of stone which had been struck by the pickaxe. Beautrelet bent forward. A puff of cold air rose to his face. He lit a match and moved it from side to side over the gap. The staircase begins farther forward than I expected, under the entrance flags almost. I can see the last steps, there, right at the bottom. Is it deep? 3 or 4 yards. The steps are very high, and there are some missing. It is hardly likely, said Monsieur Filil, that the accomplices can have had time to remove the body from the cellar when they were engaged in carrying off Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran during the short absence of the gendarmes. Besides, why should they? No, in my opinion, the body is here. A servant brought them a ladder. Beautrelet let it down through the opening and fixed it, after groping among the fallen fragments, holding the 2 uprights firmly. "Will you go down, Monsieur Filot?" he asked. The magistrate, holding a candle in his hand, ventured down the ladder. The Comte de Gesvres followed him, and Beautrelet, in his turn, placed his foot on the first rung. Mechanically, he counted 18 rungs, while his eyes examined the crypt, where the glimmer of the candle struggled against the heavy darkness. But, at the bottom, his nostrils were assailed by one of those foul and violent smells which linger in the memory for many a long day. And suddenly a trembling hand seized him by the shoulder. "Well, what is it?" "Beautrelet," stammered Monsieur Filel. "Beautrelet." He could not get a word out for terror. "Come, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, compose yourself." "Beautrelet. He is there." "Eh?" "Yes. There was something under the big stone that broke off the altar. I pushed the stone, and I touched. I shall never forget." "Where is it?" "On this side. Don't you notice the smell? And then look. See." He took the candle and held it towards a motionless form stretched upon the ground. "Oh!" exclaimed Beautrelet in a horror-stricken tone. The 3 men bent down quickly. The corpse lay half-naked, lean, frightful. The flesh, which had the greenish hue of soft wax, appeared in places through the torn clothes. But the most hideous thing, the thing that had drawn a cry of terror from the young man's lips, was the head which had just been crushed by the block of stone, the shapeless head, a repulsive mass in which not one feature could be distinguished. Beautrelet took 4 strides up the ladder and fled into the daylight and the open air. Monsieur Filil found him again lying flat on the around with his hands glued to his face. "I congratulate you, Beautrelet," he said. "In addition to the discovery of the hiding place, there are 2 points on which I have been able to verify the correctness of your assertions. First of all, the man on whom Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran fired was indeed Arsène Lupin, as you said from the start. Also, he lived in Paris under the name of Etienne de Vaudreuil. His linen is marked with the initials E.V. That ought to be sufficient proof, I think, don't you?" Isidore did not stir. "Monsieur le Comte has gone to have a horse put to. They're sending for Dr. Jouet, who will make the usual examination. In my opinion, death must have taken place a week ago, at least, the state of decomposition of the corpse. But you don't seem to be listening." Yes. What I say is based upon absolute reasons. Thus, for instance, Monsieur Filleul continued his demonstrations, without, however, obtaining any more manifest marks of attention. But Monsieur de Gesvres' return interrupted his monologue. The Comte brought 2 letters. One was to tell him that Holmlock Shears would arrive next morning. "Capital!" cried Monsieur Filleul joyfully. "Inspector Ganimard will be here too. It will be delightful." "The other letter is for you, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction," said the Comte. "Better and better," said Monsieur Filleul after reading it. "There will certainly not be much for those 2 gentlemen to do. Monsieur Beautrelet, I hear from Dieppe that the body of a young woman was found by some shrimpers this morning on the rocks." Beautrelet gave a start. "What's that? The body of a young woman?" "The body is horribly mutilated, they say, and it would be impossible to establish the identity but for a very narrow little gold curb bracelet on the right arm, which has become encrusted in the swollen skin. Now, Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran used to wear a gold curb bracelet on her right arm. Evidently, therefore, Monsieur le Comte, this is the body of your poor niece, which the sea must have washed to that distance. What do you think, Beautrelet? Nothing, nothing, or rather, yes. Everything is connected, as you see, and there is no link missing in my argument. All the facts, one after the other, however contradictory, however disconcerting they may appear, end by supporting the supposition which I imagined from the first. I don't understand. You soon will. Remember, I promised you the whole truth. But it seems to me... A little patience, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. So far, you have had no cause to complain of me. It is a fine day. Go for a walk, lunch at the chateau, smoke your pipe. I shall be back by 4 o'clock. As for my school, well, I don't care. I shall take the night train. They had reached the outhouses at the back of the chateau. Beautrelet jumped on his bicycle and rode away. At Dieppe, he stopped at the office of the local paper, the Vigie, and examined the file for the last fortnight. Then he went on to the market town of Anvermieu, 6 or 7 miles farther. At Anvermieu, he talked to the mayor, the rector, and the local policeman. The church clock struck 3. His inquiry was finished. He returned singing for joy. He pressed upon the 2 pedals turn by turn, with an equal and powerful rhythm. His chest opened wide to take in the keen air that blew from the sea. And, from time to time, he forgot himself to the extent of uttering shouts of triumph to the sky. When he thought of the aim which he was pursuing, and of the success that was crowning his efforts, Ambrumésy appeared in sight. He coasted at full speed down the slope leading to the chateau. The top rows of venerable trees that lined the road seemed to run to meet him and to vanish behind him forthwith. And, all at once, he uttered a cry. In a sudden vision he had seen a rope stretched from one tree to another across the road. His machine gave a jolt and stopped short. Beautrelet was flung 3 yards forward, with immense violence, and it seemed to him that only chance, a miraculous chance, caused him to escape a heap of pebbles, on which, logically, he ought to have broken his head. He lay for a few seconds stunned. Then, all covered with bruises, with the skin flayed from his knees, he examined the spot. On the right lay a small wood, by which his aggressor had no doubt fled. Beautrelet untied the rope. To the tree on the left, around which it was fastened, a small piece of paper was fixed with string. Beautrelet unfolded it and read, "The third and last warning." He went on to the chateau, put a few questions to the servants, and joined the examining magistrate in a room on the ground floor, at the end of the right wing, where Monsieur Filleul used to sit in the course of his operations. M. Filleul was writing, with his clerk seated opposite to him. At a sign from him, the clerk left the room, and the magistrate exclaimed, "Why, what have you been doing to yourself, Monsieur Beautrelet? Your hands are covered with blood." It's nothing," said the young man. "Just a fall occasioned by this rope, which was stretched in front of my bicycle. I will only ask you to observe that the rope comes from the chateau. Not longer than 20 minutes ago, it was being used to dry linen on, outside the laundry." "You don't mean to say so?" "Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, I am being watched here, by someone in the very heart of the place, who can see me, who can hear me, and who, minute by minute, observes my actions and knows my intentions." "Do you think so?" "I am sure of it. It is for you to discover him, and you will have no difficulty in that. As for myself, I want to have finished, and to give you the promised explanations. I have made faster progress than our adversaries expected, and I am convinced that they mean to take vigorous measures on their side. The circle is closing around me. The danger is approaching. I feel it." "Nonsense, Beautrelet. You wait and see. For the moment, let us lose no time. And, first, a question on a point which I want to have done with at once. Have you spoken to anybody of that document which Sergeant Quevillon picked up and handed you in my presence?" "No, indeed, not to a soul. But do you attach any value?" "The greatest value. It's an idea of mine, an idea, I confess, which does not rest upon a proof of any kind, for, up to the present, I have not succeeded in deciphering the document, and therefore I am mentioning it, so that we need not come back to it." Beautrelet pressed his hand on M. Filleul's and whispered, "Don't speak. There's someone listening. Outside. The gravel creaked. Beautrelet ran to the window and leaned out. There's no one there, but the border has been trodden down. We can easily identify the footprints. He closed the window and sat down again. You see, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, the enemy has even ceased to take the most ordinary precautions. He has not time left. He too feels that the hour is urgent. Let us be quick, therefore, and speak, since they do not wish us to speak. He laid the document on the table and held it in position unfolded. One observation, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction, to begin with. The paper consists almost entirely of dots and figures. And in the first 3 lines and the 5th, the only ones with which we have to do at present, for the 4th seems to present an entirely different character. Not one of those figures is higher than the figure 5. There is therefore a great chance that each of these figures represents one of the 5 vowels, taken in alphabetical order. Let us put down the result. He wrote on a separate piece of paper, E-A, A-E, E-E, A-A, A-E-A, E-O-U-E, A-O-E, O-E-I, U-I, E-E-U, E. Then he continued, As you see, this does not give us much to go upon. The key is, at the same time, very easy, because the inventor has contented himself with replacing the vowels by figures and the consonants by dots, and very difficult, if not impossible, because he has taken no further trouble to complicate the problem. It is certainly pretty obscure. Let us try to throw some light upon it. The second line is divided into 2 parts, and the second part appears in such a way that it probably forms one word. If we now seek to replace the intermediary dots by consonants, we arrive at the conclusion, after searching and casting about, that the only consonants which are logically able to support the vowels are also logically able to produce only one word, the word demoiselle. That would refer to Mademoiselle de Gesvres and Mademoiselle de Saint-Véran, undoubtedly. And do you see nothing more? Yes. I also note an hiatus in the middle of the last line, and if I apply a similar operation to the beginning of the line, I at once see that the only consonant able to take the place of the dot between the diphthongs fai and we is the letter G, and that when I have thus formed the first 5 letters of the word aiguille, it is natural and inevitable that, with the 2 next dots and the final E, I should arrive at the word aiguille. Yes, the word aiguille forces itself upon us. Finally, for the last word, I have 3 vowels and 3 consonants. I cast about again. I try all the letters, one after the other, and, starting with the principle that the 2 first letters are necessary consonants, I find that 3 words apply: fleuve, prouve, and cruce. I eliminate the words fleuve and prouve, as possessing no possible relation to a needle, and I keep the word cruce. Making hollow needle, by Jove! I admit that your solution is correct, because it needs must be, but how does it help us? Not at all, said Beautrelet in a thoughtful tone. Not at all, for the moment. Later on we shall see. I have an idea that a number of things are included in the puzzling conjunction of those 2 words, aiguille cruce. What is troubling me at present is rather the material on which the document is written, the paper employed. Do they still manufacture this sort of rather coarse-grained parchment? And then this ivory color. And those folds, the wear of those folds, and lastly, look, those marks of red sealing wax on the back. At that moment, Beautrelet was interrupted by Brédoux, the magistrate's clerk, who opened the door and announced the unexpected arrival of the chief public prosecutor. M. Fiot rose. Anything new? Is Monsieur le Procureur Général downstairs? No, Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction. Monsieur le Procureur Général has not left his carriage. He is only passing through Ambrumésy, and begs you to be good enough to go down to him at the gate. He only has a word to say to you. That's curious, muttered Monsieur Filloul. However, we shall see. "Excuse me, Beautrelet, I shan't be long." He went away. His footsteps sounded outside. Then the clerk closed the door, turned the key, and put it in his pocket. "Hello!" exclaimed Beautrelet, greatly surprised. "What are you locking us in for? We shall be able to talk so much better," retorted Brédoux. Beautrelet rushed toward another door which led to the next room. He had understood. The accomplice was Brédoux, the clerk of the examining magistrate himself. Brédoux grinned. "Don't hurt your fingers, my young friend. I have the key of that door, too." "There's the window!" cried Beautrelet. "Too late," said Brédoux, planting himself in front of the casement, revolver in hand. Every chance of retreat was cut off. There was nothing more for Isidore to do, nothing except to defend himself against the enemy who was revealing himself with such brutal daring. He crossed his arms. "Good," mumbled the clerk. "And now let us waste no time." He took out his watch. "Our worthy Monsieur Filleau will walk down to the gate. At the gate he will find nobody, of course. No more public prosecutor than my eye. Then he will come back. That gives us about 4 minutes. It will take me 1 minute to escape by this window, clear through the little door by the ruins, and jump on the motorcycle waiting for me. That leaves 3 minutes, which is just enough." Brédoux was a queer sort of misshapen creature, who balanced on a pair of very long spindle legs a huge trunk, as round as the body of a spider and furnished with immense arms. A bony face and a low, small, stubborn forehead pointed to the man's narrow obstinacy. Beautrelet felt a weakness in the legs and staggered. He had to sit down. "Speak," he said. "What do you want?" "The paper. I've been looking for it for 3 days. I haven't got it." "You're lying. I saw you put it back in your pocketbook when I came in." Next, you must undertake to keep quite quiet. You're annoying us. Leave us alone and mind your own business. Our patience is at an end." He had come nearer, with the revolver still aimed at the young man's head, and spoke in a hollow voice, with a powerful stress on each syllable that he uttered. His eyes were hard, his smile cruel. Beautrelet gave a shudder. It was the first time that he was experiencing the sense of danger, and such danger. He felt himself in the presence of an implacable enemy, endowed with blind and irresistible strength. "And next?" he asked, with less assurance in his voice. "Next? Nothing. You will be free. We will forget." There was a pause. Then Brédoux resumed. "There is only a minute left. You must make up your mind. Come, old chap, don't be a fool. We are the stronger, you know, always and everywhere. Quick, the paper." Isidore did not flinch. With a livid and terrified face, he remained master of himself nevertheless, and his brain remained clear amid the breakdown of his nerves. The little black hole of the revolver was pointing at 6 inches from his eyes. The finger was bent and obviously pressing on the trigger. It only wanted a moment. "The paper," repeated Brédoux. "If not—" "Here it is," said Beautrelet. He took out his pocketbook and handed it to the clerk, who seized it eagerly. "Capital. We've come to our senses. I've no doubt there's something to be done with you. You're troublesome, but full of common sense. I'll talk about it to my pals. And now I'm off. Goodbye." He pocketed his revolver and turned back the fastening of the window. There was a noise in the passage. "Goodbye," he said again. "I'm only just in time." But the idea stopped him. With a quick movement he examined the pocketbook. "Damn and blast it!" he grated through his teeth. "The paper's not there. You've done me." He leaped into the room. 2 shots rang out. Isidore, in his turn, had seized his pistol and fired. "Missed, old chap," shouted Brédoux. "Your hand's shaking. You're afraid." They caught each other round the body and came down to the floor together. There was a violent and incessant knocking at the door. Isidore's strength gave way, and he was at once overcome by his adversary. It was the end. A hand was lifted over him, armed with a knife, and fell. A fierce pain burst into his shoulder. He let go. He had an impression of someone fumbling in the inside pocket of his jacket and taking the paper from it. Then, through the lowered veil of his eyelids, he half saw the man stepping over the windowsill. The same newspapers which on the following morning related the last episodes that had occurred at the Château d'Ambrumésy, the trickery at the chapel, the discovery of Arsène Lupin's body and of Raymond's body, and lastly, the murderous attempt made upon Beautrelet by the clerk to the examining magistrate, also announced two further pieces of news: the disappearance of Ganimard, and the kidnapping of Holmlock Shears, in broad daylight, in the heart of London, at the moment when he was about to take the train for Dover. Lupin's gang, therefore, which had been disorganized for a moment by the extraordinary ingenuity of a 17-year-old schoolboy, was now resuming the offensive, and was winning all along the line from the first. Lupin's two great adversaries, Shears and Ganimard, were put away. Isidore Beautrelet was disabled. The police were powerless. For the moment, there was no one left capable of struggling against such enemies.